night. I was putting some slides together here for you guys today, and my daughter said, "What are you working on, Mom?" And I said, "Presentation skills." And she said, "No, I know you have presentation skills. What are you working on?" I said, "Presenting on presentation skills." And it's funny how it sounds funny, but it's actually so incredibly important. And I think it's something that if every one of you can think about in your life, some of the most hopefully uplifting moments, but sometimes the most stressful moments have occurred when we have to give presentations. It's something that I don't care who you are, there's absolutely a lot of stress involved. It could be just with one client, it could be with your boss, it could be with the owners of the company, or senior executives if you're in a large brokerage. So it's something that really resonates. And I remember being in university in Ontario many years ago, and I remember having to present one of my first presentations, believe it or not, outside the classroom, I guess, or the typical classroom, just talking in front of the class in those years was around around a competition. We actually had a marketing competition. I did my undergrad in marketing, and we had to stand up. And of course, I didn't quite realize till the day before. You can imagine now. I remember asking when we were preparing, asking the prof, so how many people are going to be there at this competition? He said, 800 to 1,000. So needless to say, it was a very, very long night. I went over that presentation. I only spoke, I think, for 15 minutes, but I probably spent at least 24 hours preparing over a period of time. And I actually don't even, people are like, "Oh my gosh, you were great." And I honestly don't remember what I said. I don't remember one word to this day of what I said or what occurred. It's almost like a blackout because of the nerves. So and people said that to me, "Oh, you're such a, you speak in front of people all the time. You're such a great presenter. You can kind of wing it when you need to." That's also happened over the years. So it's just something I find a lot of people stress over. I have very senior people, very people that we didn't even think that get nervous before presentations, and they absolutely do. I do also say, though, nerves are a little bit important. I find the most effective I've ever been as a presenter is when I always have a little bit of agitation before I get up on stage, or a little bit of agitation before I do something significant, because that actually gets the blood pumping. So otherwise, I've actually, I think, fallen a little flat. So let's talk about presentation skills. So it's going to be very basic, actually, over today and the next session. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the only way I can say it. What works well, what doesn't work, and when it goes really horribly off, and what to do to prevent that. So we're all uniquely different. We all come in with different strengths, different areas, which we'll tackle at the beginning. And then just really coming up with a plan of attack for each of you. So hopefully each of you will come up with one or two things you can pull away, whether it's with one client or more. So just a note there to mute, and I'm not sure if Carrie's listening still, if she can make sure to mute folks. There's a few people, I think, who've unmuted. So what stops us is one of the biggest things. So the first webinar we're going to talk about, or first thing we're going to do in the webinar is really talk about the practical stuff. Okay, so what are good presenters and communicators, what that looks like also, and then we're going to tackle in the second one, we're going to get more into the elements of anxiety and things like that we can try to minimize, because that's one of the main issues. So I want to spend a lot of time in the next one on that, as well as just maybe actually coming up with how we would tackle something. I'm going to do a couple of cases in the next one where we'll actually say, okay, so here's your scenario. What type of presentation do you do? And we'll brainstorm it as a group. Okay, so that'll be in the second set. All right, so when we talk about presentations, it's one of the biggest things in terms of communication, because communicators, if you're a good communicator, doesn't always mean you're going to be a great presenter, but there are certain things about communication that you can leverage. So who in your world or in the world, I'll throw it out there just for conversation purposes, if you can put in the chat, who in the world is a really good communicator? Just pop a name up there. Who in the media, who out there's a super communicator? Obama. It's funny. I was going to predict that. I was like, yeah, I bet you someone's going to say Obama. And interestingly, Obama has a very certain style. That's all Obama. So tell me what you think it is. What is it that he does that's really effective? Yes, he definitely has some authenticity. He's genuine. What else? Charismatic, which is interesting because the way he's charismatic is actually quite muted. He's not sort of out there and in your face and everything else. He's charismatic in a very subtle way. And being slightly more introverted, it shows how that can be a big advantage, how you can resonate with people and you don't have to be sort of, larger than life. He engages an audience, relaxed and conversational, love that. And that's a huge element. Getting some feedback here on the call, so if someone can make sure you're muted. He always seems comfortable. I bet you he isn't, though. I bet you he absolutely is not. I bet you every time he's gone in, for him, of course, we're all uniquely different, he will have elements of stress. Selective hand gestures, love that. He's relatable. He's connecting with people. And it's something I think that some of it comes a little naturally to him, but it would be really interesting now. I don't know if anyone's actually seen Obama, because I think he's in Halifax, or he has been in Halifax. I know he's coming here to St. John's. So just to see what he's going to speak about, but I would love to ask him about his presentation style, how he developed it, or did he? How much was natural, how much wasn't? I think it would be something that we'd all love to hear if he writes books and all those things down the road. It'd be incredible to hear about. So think about that now. Traditionally, we've often seen just general communicators and people get people riled up or excited about something, being really outgoing, really out there. But Obama is not, and he was extremely effective, and I think he will always be known as one of the top communicators / presenters that we've probably our generations on the call will have seen. So think about your own style. You may be that person that's bigger than life. You may be the person that's more introverted. You may be a person who is really chatty, and you may be a person who likes to say just a few words. Each of those can be used to be extremely effective. I've had people say, oh, but you have to be a certain way to be up on stage. No, and I'm not saying you're going to be on stage. I just use that as an example. You absolutely do not. You absolutely do not. So think about yourself, think about something, and I want you to think about that one thing that you're really good at, and through the session today and the session next time, I want you to think about how you use that to your advantage. Okay, so we'll talk about a lot of the different styles. Now, here's the thing with presentations, or if you think about ads, or if you think about places where people are trying to communicate in a larger scale, if you think about that perspective, not all things actually translate like they're supposed to. So sometimes we want to communicate something and we have an outcome we want to achieve. Sometimes it actually doesn't work. Sometimes they may remember, let's just say I go out and speak at a conference, like I'm speaking at a conference next week, and I go out there and they thought I was great, but they don't remember what I spoke about. It's kind of pointless. You have to be able to translate not just you, but the outcome that you're looking for. And that's the ultimate test of a presentation, a talk, a meeting, or a presentation with a client, whatever it may be. Are you actually achieving what you need to achieve? So that's the kicker. This is the $1,000,000 question. How do you do that specifically? And how much are you going to do to your own natural ability, and how much are you going to adapt to your audience? We'll talk quite a bit about that. So what do you think about this? Great speakers aren't born, they're made. Is it true? Interesting, hey? So yeah, some people are thinking a bit of both. There you go. So it's true, a bit of both. There are, I think any leader that I've talked to, or speaker, facilitator, any of the above, if you actually talk to them, some of them will say, I've got a natural comfort there. Majority of people will say no. They will have learned over time, and they will have honed their skills over time. On occasion, though, you will get a phenomenal young person who's a speaker who works out really well. But here's my noticing, as someone who does a lot of speaking and I do a lot of engagements and things like that, is that the best speakers are the ones who adapt. The best speakers are the ones that can actually just notice something in their audience and change what they're saying or do what they're doing. That's the ultimate test. So I bet most people can't always do that when they first start speaking. So there's always a natural that some people may have comfort just standing there on stage or standing in front of somebody new they didn't meet before, that's one hurdle. Absolutely, they must find it easier on. But what they say, how they say it, and how they adapt to their audience, I would argue, is a little more learned behavior. So what makes a bad presenter, presentation, or speaker? Tell me what really you find. We're all uniquely different. Tell me what you find to be really bad. If you saw someone speak at a conference or you were with someone when they gave a presentation, monotone, yes, too much information on the slides, boring, and boring is a relative term to what you're talking about. Let's see what else we have here. No enthusiasm. Oh yes, reading off the paper, no inflection, no facial expressions. Absolutely, these are such great suggestions. And interestingly, when you actually talk to people who present and it doesn't come across as well, do you think they actually know how it comes across? Yeah, not listening. Absolutely love that. Do you think people who you say, oh my gosh, that was just hideous. I can't believe we had to sit through that for an hour. Do you think that that person knows? Sometimes, yeah, sometimes they do. Yes, perfect. Thank you for that. Depends on the self-awareness. Absolutely. Some people naturally are not intuitive. They can't read people very well. And again, no harm, no foul. We're all uniquely different. So if you can't read something really well, I always say you have to have a wingman or wingwoman, wing person to actually help you with that. How do you know when it's not landing? When in doubt, I always say just ask, but maybe that's not an option. So some people absolutely don't understand. So when they get feedback on something, they actually thought they were on a flow. But sometimes they're very cerebral. They're all in their head and they're not even noticing what's going on around them, that everyone's on their phone or, trying to look, or looking at the floor or doing anything but listening. Okay. So again, every single time I present or do anything, I always try to get feedback because maybe I'm one of those people. Maybe I'm one of those people who's not meeting the needs of the people in front of me. And that's something we should always do. I don't care. Even Obama should find out how he performed at any point in time. So those are really great. And I think bad presenting is something, the worst thing is too, sometimes when we get to a fear factor, we think about that bad presenter and we're like, oh God, I just don't want to come across like that person, right? All right. In terms of a great presenter, so we talked a few things about Obama. What else? What other things make a really great presenter or person who's presenting an idea? Eye contact, love it. Absolutely. Knowledgeable, smiling, yes, absolutely. Relevance, love that. Can you relate to the audience at all? I mean, these are some basic things that we know. The question is, how do we do it? And how do we do it specifically for the audience that's in front of us? So as much as I know I can go in and pretty well wing anything, the one thing I will ask, even if I had no slides prepared for an entire day of working with a team, which has only happened once, but let's just say I had no slides prepared, nothing to keep everyone visually on track. If I know my audience, I can pretty well figure out very quickly. So even if I walked into a room, I could probably figure out, not that we all want to do this, including myself, I don't either, but I could probably figure out, or we could probably figure out what these people are looking for, and then cater to them that way. So again, sometimes that flexibility is helpful in it. That relevance makes all the difference in the world. Confidence, interesting one. Someone just said confidence. And I think when I think about presenting, I remember speaking at one of my scariest ever, which I don't know if I mentioned it before to anyone who's been on the calls before, but I had this paper that was getting published. Anyway, I had to speak at a conference, and it was an academic conference. Okay, so I've been a person in the work world for many, many years, did my master's, and anyway, some of the work I did when those papers I wrote got published. And it was a very big honor. I was thrilled, but I don't know if you know the academic world very well, but they're cutthroat. So I was never more scared in my entire life, that was about 15 years ago, than presenting at an academic conference. And if any of you are academics, I'm sure you completely understand. That confidence was at an all-time low. And I was pretty comfortable then speaking in general, but I was so scared. But the one thing I was scared most about when I thought about it after the fact was the fact that I wasn't a statistics guru. I had stats. If someone asked me why did I use a two-tailed versus a one-tailed, I'd I'd kind of be stuck. It's not my happy place. So the topic itself was actually quite interesting, and it was kind of new within the Canadian landscape. So the academics were more caught up, thankfully, in the topic than they were in my statistics. Sadly, the person before me that I watched get annihilated on their statistics. So I was literally sweating buckets walking up there. So that was my scariest moment, because I thought they know more than I do. The irony is my topic itself, cut the statistics out of it, I knew more about than they did. So generally we do. Generally, one of the biggest tips I give to people who are worried about speaking about something with a client, with a colleague, generally we know our stuff pretty well, right? Like, so speaking, if I had to go speak about insurance to you guys, I would probably be just as scared as the academic. Because I don't know that world. And if I was a young professional trying to figure it out and you guys were the experts, that's the most daunting. But generally speaking, that's not what happens. Even if you're in the area of insurance or claims or whatever you're in, you probably know it well. And you certainly have stories that are unique to you. So just that alone should help breed some confidence. So I'm kind of really glad you brought up the confidence piece. So a couple of quick things. The anxiety piece we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But is there anyone, think about it. If you're someone who doesn't get anxious over these things, you're probably part of the 0.1%, because there's always some anxiety, generally speaking. And so how do you actually embrace that anxiety? How do you actually, can you use it to your advantage, but not getting to the point of paralysis? So we'll talk more about that later, and some tips and techniques you can use for that. And as well, of course, the things we talked about today will help as well. Audience-centered. When in doubt, if it's centered around the audience, who are these people, what could be interesting to them, and how do I need to present in a way they're going to connect with me? That's something that you need to make sure is effective, right? You accomplished the goal, which I recommended already. Key takeaways I remembered. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, because I think sometimes as professionals, we know so much, right? We want it, there's all these little things that, I forgot to mention this, I forgot to mention that, I forgot to mention this. At the end of the day, they don't need to know everything. So when I do all-day sessions, as an example, if they can walk away all the difference in the world. And usually they stick with them. I had someone come up to me, it was the biggest compliment ever. A year later, he did another session with me, and he came up and said how much he took these 3 things, ironically it was 3, and he said, here's how I applied them and here's what happened. And it was actually one of my most powerful moments, and that happened a couple of days ago. So made all the difference in the world. They get to know you. They have a little bit of who you are. Adding a human element makes a huge difference. Some of you are going to be more comfortable with that than others, but even people that aren't really comfortable, I bet you there is something that you could do within your comfort level. There's nothing worse than things going over time, and can it be interactive? So these are some of the things we'll talk a little bit more about, but how interactive can it be, right? Even if I speak at a conference, unless they tell me not to, I always will ask a question. I don't care if it's 500 people in the room. There's someone who's going to answer me. And it's amazing how different that makes things. And especially if you're giving a presentation to a client. So if say it's with a commercial client or even a personal lines client who's very stressed out, right? How do you make it interactive? Or how do you notice things in the audience and say, hey, I'm not sure we're connecting on this. Can you tell me what you're confused about, or what is it here that you need to know more about right now? So it could be just a simple clarification there as well. So I'm curious, though, for next time as much as for now, what's the thing that scares you the most about presentations? What scares you the most? And I will try to make some notes here so I can keep track for next time. We can tackle some of them next time. Let's see. Ooh, getting embarrassed. Questions. I'll have to go back after and have a look at these. Let's see. All right, we've got boring, being boring, stumbling, getting the point across. Okay, I'm going to make notes of those. The ums and the ahs. Oh, thanks for that. The ums and ahas. Yes. Oh, yes. And I do it. I just did it. So again, we'll talk about that as well. General judgment. Love that. Thank you so much for putting that out there. I think some of us are probably more self-critical than others. So those of us that are more self-critical, don't have more of that natural, easy confidence, probably a little hard on ourselves. It probably makes us great as professionals, but how do we be a little less self-critical? Or how do we put some things in place? I can't obviously coach each one of you individually on it, but really understanding what's stopping you, or maybe getting some validation in other ways, which we can talk about as well. All right, that's great. I really appreciate that. And these are very natural things. These are things that we also see people doing every day. And sometimes we even get embarrassed for them. An audience generally, unless you're in a competitive landscape, are really rooting for you, right? They want you to be great. So when things go a little off the rails, sometimes a little bit people don't notice, but if things go way off the rails, people find it really hard to watch, right? And we've all been there, and I think some of it's think of the worst case scenario and the what if scenario, which we'll talk more about next time. All right, so let's see. First of all, what's the reason you're doing it? So, I, for example, am getting called in next week to speak on something. And so my first question was, so what's the purpose? Why am I speaking on that particular topic? And how does it apply to these people? Okay, so again, why give it? Know your purpose. Are you just informing? And again, is this something that the audience is going to know in advance, right? If you're with a client base, if this is client-based perspective, is it persuading? Are you actually looking for a decision on something, right? So what's the ultimate purpose of what you're talking about? Is it just informing them? Is it actually persuading them and influencing them? So, or is it more of an educational component? And there's other things it could be as well, whatever it means to you. So know the purpose. Know what the purpose is for the person who's asking you to give the talk, and know the purpose of, from the audience perspective. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Organizing your presentation. We'll do a couple of practical things. So when you're thinking about how to put something together, so different facilitators, presenters will do this differently. But it's just for you to think about. And it should be natural to you, but also cater to your audience. So say, for example, next week where they asked me to come in and speak on a certain topic, I asked why. Like, what is it specifically relevant? So the one I'm going to do next week is probably going to be more of a problem solution. So here's what's happening, right? Let's brainstorm as a team, and also I'll give them tips and tricks in terms of solutions. So it's going to be more around here's what the challenge is, here's what the solution is, okay? There's also natural ones that you'll find in whatever thing you're speaking about, if it's with a client or with a larger group or whoever. Is there a natural logical pattern around the topic, right? So if it was around, and I'm not an expert by any means in your world, so I'm speaking hopefully not too out of turn, but if it's in claims, say you're giving a talk on claims, so in terms so chances are you've had some talks where they just sort of say, oh, well, here's the agenda of what we're going to speak about, kind of like I did today. Here's what we're going to talk about. You need to grab them first, because otherwise people aren't really just half listening. So why should they listen to you? Where's the relevancy of you? Why are you giving the talk? Right? So, introduce yourself, yes, but maybe introduce yourself in a different way. Maybe there's a little story. I like stories, as you can tell. I find I love hearing other people's stories, and that's probably why I use them quite a bit myself. Is there a joke? Is there something you can do even at the beginning to invite some participation? So how do you get them bought in? How do you get them connected? If it's with a client base, that's an example. So, maybe it's a simple like, hey, here's what we had planned. Which parts resonate with you? Where do you want to spend most of our time today? Right? Or what's one thing you want to take away from our conversation today? It could be simply that, just to get them connected. Okay? So in terms, and get the response. Yes, listen for the response. The nuggets. Okay. So if you think about, as I said before, everything that you know so much, right? And each one of us has a unique experience in what we know, and we're all very unique to that. So when you think about all that we know, and sometimes if a topic comes up and it's something you do every day, it's kind of overwhelming, right? Or how do we explain this? So you really need to think about, well, what's their perspective? What's their need? What are they looking for? And then take all your stuff and bring it down to a few nuggets. So in your outcomes about how you want, what you want people to walk away with, if you know your audience, what they're looking for, what are 2 or 3 things you absolutely want them to take away? So if I'm doing an all-day session, I say to people sometimes, this is one thing, if nothing else, I want you to take away. Right? It could be, and you can even frame it that way, because it could be something that profound. It could be around mitigating risk, or you haven't thought about this before, or did you know that, right? Or it could be just a different perspective on something. So one of the biggest problems, and that's what someone had mentioned earlier as well, is too much information up on the slides, but just too much information, right? You're not able to take. It's just never going to happen. And plus, as experts, which you are, then people should want to come to you for more information. So that's a win-win, especially if it's a client base or potential client base that you're speaking to. All right. So in terms of, yes, the rule of 3. So do you remember, and who remembers when I was thinking about the rule of 3? So, think of things, you can even come up with sayings, which are really silly and fun, but like stop, drop, and roll, they come in 3s. It's extraordinary. I meant to go and look, write down a few more, because I thought of a few last night, but that's, to my mind, if you don't know what that is, it was around, if you get caught on fire, what do? You stop, drop, and roll. But it sticks with people. Okay, so plan the things, the 3 things that you want your audience to remember. It could be 4 or 5. I'm just using this to kind of make it more memorable for you. So here's the other thing. So it's like in real estate when they say location, location, location. So with communication, if you have say you're speaking for 20 minutes, say you're speaking for 5 minutes or even an hour, what is it you're telling them? Tell them again and tell them again. Okay, you really got to repeat, not in the same exact sentence, but repeat the main things that you want to take away. It's no different in advertising when you hear people advertising stuff and you'll hear them say the name of the organization or the sale or whatever the heck is happening. They'll repeat it and then repeat it and then repeat it. And usually you'll hear it. If you hear it, it's around 3 times for sure. So take your nuggets, make sure they remember the nuggets. So those nuggets are what makes you the reason you were there to give the presentation in the first place. Okay, in preparing, this is an interesting one because preparing is different for everybody. Okay, so preparing has an element of how many times do you do it. So like I said before, many years ago, was when I was really uncomfortable, I would prepare. These days, I'm pretty fluid. As you know, I'm not scripted. I never look at my notes if I have any at all. But that's not something I was used to doing years ago. Years ago, I was very scripted because it gave me confidence. If I had my script in front of me, it gave me confidence. If I had it in my hand, it gave me confidence. So, and I have evolved to where I am today. But you got to remember, I do these things all the time. So some people naturally can go that far, some people not. So what is your comfort level? How do you need to do it? A couple of tips, though, would be, I'll just put these up here, would be to actually video yourself. This is horrifying. I know it's horrifying. One thing that I did years ago, I had done to me, and I actually repeated with a group that I was working with, is video yourself. Even when you're in front of a client, it's kind of nice just to film yourself as if you're talking to a client or as if you're giving a presentation or anything in between, and see, you will notice things about yourself. Do you, when you're thinking, do you look up at the sky, which is what I do, which isn't always a good thing. So I'm not looking the person in the eye. When I'm thinking about something, sometimes I'll look at the ceiling while I'm talking. So again, one of the things that I try to change. Do you move your hands? I found that when I got really nervous, when I was filming myself years or I got someone to film me, I would actually do something with my hand. Like I'd be like putting my hand next to my pocket and moving it around. I don't even know what I was doing, but it was something that seemed to occur. So notice your little tics, the things that you say, the ums and ahs, and just kind of don't be too hard on yourself. Just notice it, because it's amazing. The next time I felt myself doing it, I'm more aware of it, so I consciously stopped doing it midway through. Right? I had this senior person asked me a question, and then when I was internal in an organization, they asked me to give a presentation on the fly. Heather, stand up and tell us all about that. And so I was filming, so I actually asked to look at the recording, and I did stop what I was naturally doing. So keep an eye, rehearse against the clock, really important. If you're scripted, it's not as bad. If you have paper in front of you, it's not so bad, but you really want to have a sense, because what often happens as well, and remember this, we usually speed up when we're nervous. We don't slow down. Now, you may be different and slow down, but generally people will speed up. So as much as, you know, people don't want to hear someone really long-winded, you don't want a 15-minute speech in 5 minutes, because it's really, the pace will be too quick. And people will notice, and they'll actually tune you out. Okay, so notice the clock, try it out, rehearse it in front of somebody, you know, and get their opinion. How did it go? Because if you do it in front of somebody or you video yourself, you're going to be a little more nervous. So create that anxiety early to try it out. And the more you do it, the better you will get. So if you're someone who wants to become better at speaking, volunteer to do it. I know you're like, why would I do that? Well, it does make a difference, because if you talk to any speaker in the world, if you talk to people that naturally just get up and do their thing on the fly with a client or whatever, then it's because they practiced over many, many years. And sometimes it's because we don't do things well, okay, that we learn to be better, which isn't really that surprising. So a couple of different things. I'm just going to put these up there we go. Put it all together. So just a couple of little tips with connecting to your audience. Okay, so everyone's different in how they do this. You had some great ideas before. You talked about eye contact, right? Looking someone in the eye, throwing in some humor, you know. So use your hands came up earlier as well. Obviously, you don't want to look, you know, too much, which I have been known to do, by the way. Use my hands too much, like if someone said, like, speaking in Italian. So again, it's all in moderation. So moving around the space that you're in. Some people don't like to do that because they've got notes. But if you have some confidence, it connects with people. So if you're in a space, even with a client, and you're, say, you got a PowerPoint presentation, or you've got it on your laptop in front of them, you're showing them something or whatever it might be, is there any way to move or connect with them? So if it's in a larger space and it's a larger group of people, how do you move around so people feel that sort of connection with you? Okay, tell a story. And again, some of you are not going to be as comfortable telling a story. It doesn't have to be a really emotional story. It just has to be a story. Maybe it's something you did. Maybe it's something you saw early in your career. Everyone's uniquely different. Maybe it's things that you notice in the industry. This is on the topic you're speaking on. Help them form a mental picture. So people, this is a piece that you have to remember. Some people are visual, right? Which is why I always make sure I have slides of some sort, because, or have pictures or whatever it might be, because people are visual and other people are not so visual, right? Some people want a mental picture. They want to think it, not see it. Okay. So how do you create a mental picture? And you could say, oh, it's like the size of 3 football fields, or, you know, give them some visual representation. It could be an analogy. It's like going over the Niagara Falls, you know, whatever it might be for you. If you don't think that way, just think about maybe introducing one little, and it could be something tangible like football fields versus something different like drowning, or I felt like I was drowning in that. So people have that sense of connection, okay? And connect with emotions. So not everyone's going to be comfortable with this one, but I'll throw it out there anyway. So there's an element of connecting with emotions. What is it your audience is most fearful about? Why are they listening to you? How do you connect with them at that level? So for example, if I'm talking to a group about, say it's about difficult conversations, then I will tell them maybe about a difficult conversation I had, or I will connect with them and say, look, I was up all night thinking about it. I couldn't sleep. I slept about 2 hours going in before I had that meeting because it was really stressful for me. Gosh, that was only 6 years ago. You know, like some connection that they can sort of sense you, but also that emotion, okay, and draw out that emotion. And that's why we don't have those difficult conversations. But yeah, because we have fear around these sorts of things. So connect with the emotional side of it. If we weren't emotional, we wouldn't have a problem with a lot of things. So connect with that as best you can. Okay, so sometimes a surprise is good. Sometimes a moment of pause, maybe a vulnerability in yourself. It could be a surprise in a story. It could be a surprise about the impact of something that's coming down the pipeline. It could be the markets and what's looking like in the markets right now. It could be vulnerability as well. So what's the mistake that you've made? Or, hey, this is something how I shifted to better do the following. Here's a mistake I made years ago in the particular area we're talking about. So you're showing vulnerability, but you're showing it is what it is to be human, but also what it is to be like probably your audience, right? So again, I'm not saying you have to do this, but maybe just consider it. All right, so visual slides and bullet points. Most people, I would predict here, are going to be using some form of PowerPoint, could be Prezi if you haven't heard of it. It's not for everybody because it's very moving, so some people actually don't like it. Some people love it. So there's different things that you're going to be using, but chances are there's some sort of visual representation. And even if you have a video, as an example, is it going to be just stagnant or is it going to be moving? So visual slides, what does that look like? It could be absolutely anything. It could be, as you guys know, I love pictures. I love graphs. I like people seeing things. So how do you actually jazz it up with that? Oftentimes when I see presentations that are least powerful, just like someone had said earlier, is the bullet points, right? Having a bunch of bullet points listed. And after a while, you get so mesmerized you can't follow it. Or too many words on a slide, not enough white space. Just 3 little lines versus those 10. Can you do a synopsis of it and talk about it versus putting it all up on the slide? So pictures and however that looks, just think about it when you're doing a presentation. And it could be an analogy you're using that you can actually connect with in a picture for those people that are visual and not thinker. Thinking in their brain, they want to see it on the screen, more tangible. So, and here's someone mentioned earlier, you guys are on the ball, monotone. So what are, our pitch, our volume, our pace, our timbre, the last one I'll explain. So pitch, are you up, are you down, are you monotone? Is it all the same? And I remember a prof years ago, I think it was my undergrad, and he was so monotone. And I didn't drink coffee at the time, and I had to drink coffee to go in. I was one of these studious folks that actually wanted to go to class and listen, because I was always scared to fail. So I went in, I'd always bring a coffee in, and people were like, I didn't think you drink coffee. I do now. Because the monotone was just, it literally would put you to sleep. It's extraordinary. And I see presenters doing that. This is where also recording yourself. So whether it's a video recording or a regular recording, just record it, and is it monotone? And if you're not sure, get someone else to listen to it. Is there enough inflection in your voice? The volume, I naturally am someone who doesn't need a loudspeaker because I'm pretty loud, as my husband will tell me as well. So I'm naturally louder. A lot of people won't speak up when they're nervous. Most people don't yell when they're nervous. They will actually come down a notch. So depending on the space you're in, what is the space? Is it a small meeting space? Then yeah, I probably have to pull back a little. If you're nervous and you're pulling back, it might be perfectly fine. Volume, and if nothing else, if you're not confident, volume will actually make people think that you are. So when people are speaking like a mouse, then people think they're nervous, whether they are or not. Okay, so volume is important. Pace, as I said, we speed up naturally. How do you actually practice it and slow down? And I bet you if you think back, for those of you that are client-facing, or even internally, if you think of your internal clients, I bet you when you first had to have those first conversations and you were new to the industry and you had to have, I bet you anything, you got nervous. And chances are you may have spoke quicker than you normally do. That's pretty much the standard. So how do you slow it down? How do you have a little reminder for yourself to slow down? I had one client who was trying to improve, and so sort of mapped out what his audience, all this kind of stuff. as a coaching client because it was such a big thing for him. And the pace, he naturally was a really fast, not a Newfoundlander, funny enough, because if you know us, Newfoundlanders are pretty quick. His pace was over the top, even for here. And it was sort of that, and he was mumbling. And so it was sort of that, how do you actually slow down that pace? And so we actually had a little reminder on each slide that no one would have noticed, just to take a breath and slow down. And so it would be, get a drink of water and slow down. Just have that conscious moment to actually slow your pace down. And timbre, that's the how melodious your voice is. Okay? So as opposed to, yes, we need to do that, or yes, we need to do that. One is more melodic, if I'm thinking like a song, one of them is not. So it depends on the audience. Do they want something sort of soothing, or do they want something abrupt, right? Whatever suits the audience would make sense there. So who are your audience? Who are the needs? And we're going to talk about that next time in terms of, let's pick some scenarios. So if there's any scenarios you actually have and you want to put it privately in the chat, please do. So I'll pick probably 3 different scenarios next time, and we'll actually walk through, so who is that audience and what would they be looking for? So who they are, what are their needs, and of course they're all different, but what's any generalities you can come up with, and therefore how do you respond? So if you think about knowing the audience, you have to think about what's in it for them. So why are they there? What do they want to walk away with? Because they honestly don't want to talk about, they don't want to hear about the other stuff. So what do they already know? You do not want to regurgitate things they already know, because you will lose them immediately. And oftentimes once you lose them, it's really hard to get them back. How many people are there, right? Is this a lot of people? Is it a few people? Who, and this is a big one, I've talked about this before with influence and persuasion, is who are the power makers? Who are the decision makers? Who needs to be talked to in a session? And it may not be the person who has the power, right? Who do you need to address to win that audience over, to win that client over, to win that industry partners or industry people over, right? So who is it that needs to be, you can need to connect to, you need to understand, or you need to actually refer to in the session, okay? So where's the common ground? Where do you guys overlap? Like, are you in the same industry? Are you in different industries? Why are you there? So what's the common ground and how do you connect on that? What's the problem in hand? Sometimes you can add additional things as well, like need to know or nice to know. Sorry, that should be, sorry. So what is some little extras you can throw in there as well, but not too many. Stick to the basics. In terms of, some of you might have been on the call last time, we talked about adapting in terms of relationships. So this actually plays heavily into it as well. Time here, we'll just finish off on this bit. So be yourself versus adapting. So some people will say, look, I'm just a person who's going to do this, this, or that. So I think the key is figure out who your audience is and what the ideal scenario is, and then balance how you naturally are to versus how you're going to need to adapt to meet the audience needs. So, for example, if I'm someone who is very detail-oriented, I might be speaking to a bunch of people who own their own businesses. Do you think they're going to want to get into minutia? Probably not. Now, if they're technical people, maybe they will. But maybe you have to go and you have to be more big picture thinker and you have to speak more in a broader perspective. Then that may not be natural for you. So how do you do that? It may be in your own way. How do you do that? So adapting is something where I say to people, you got to be yourself, but if that means not meeting the needs of the audience, then you have to do some adaptation, okay? So if you think back, for those that did the last session, some of you may not, but I'll do a very quick one just for those folks as we finish off. So the D, I, S, and C. So we think about the different styles of people. So if you, for example, had a small group, or there were some really key decision makers or influencers in the group, or if you could probably label them as well, which is terrible. Say, generally speaking, like, for example, technical folk, you'll often find them a lot of C's as an example. So again, how can you use this as well? So if you're with a client, or we'd say you're a presentation to do with a client or a board, or it could be with like a large family or whoever the heck it is, how can you figure out what they are and what they need? So a D, for example, if you found out someone was a dominant, then you have to be clear and you have to be precise. It has to be very specific, executive summary only. They don't want to talk about, they don't want as much of a personal connection. Okay, so those stories only go so far. You might throw in a story, but it may be short and sweet just to get the point across. Other people, you may have more stories, more personal connections, more how this is, how you've been through something maybe that's helpful. Your eyes, so these people, say if you were talking to people that were in the marketing sector, you probably have a lot of eyes in there, right? So people who are very connected, people-oriented, how do you light them? How do you actually get them? Chances are they might be more comfortable to step up and talk as an audience. So how do you throw out questions? How do you get them to be in the limelight a little bit? Eyes naturally do have a comfort level, more comfortable with presenting and speaking out or speaking up. And how do you have a little fun with it, right? So think about the audience. Are there other people who are methodical and patient, sort of that team, like quieter group? Then how do you actually do that? So they're thinkers. So don't judge them for not speaking up as an audience. So how do you actually give them the process? And a C as well, but for both S's and C's, for folks that saw this last time, maybe give them things in advance. Like I do this with sessions sometimes, is I'll say, look, I'm going to give you an article to read before we meet, or maybe there's a video, or maybe your organization has some videos, if it's around insurance or whatever. Maybe there's something there that they can learn and get their thoughts already started, especially if you want them to make a decision, in that meeting, if you're doing a presentation, or you want them to have a purchase. You want them to purchase something, right? Then how do you actually give them time to do so and give them something in advance? And then how do you present? Right? So it's slow and methodical with S's and C's. D's and I's are quicker and at a much quicker pace. So again, you may not have the luxury of knowing all this, but what can you find out about your audience? Who are the movers and shakers? If it's 300 or 400 people, that's harder to do, but what generalities can you make? So as you can see, there's a lot of adapting that you would do here, but what is natural to you? So, okay, my dear, time flies. All right, so hopefully you get something out of that. We'll be much more interactive next time. We'll have a couple of cases to try to figure out. So the case in particular, something you have to speak at in the near future. If you want to put it in the private chat, that would be excellent, because I can certainly do a little case around it and we can brainstorm as a group. Or it could be just a general thing that you find, whether it's clients or public speaking or whatever it might be. Otherwise, I'll just do some general ones. And we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And I was going to say, you can rate my presentation today. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.